Welcome everyone. If you're looking to build the ultimate team in Anime Vanguards without wasting endless hours experimenting or diving down a rabbit hole of YouTube guides, then you're in the right place. In today's video, we're breaking down the best units in the game. Whether you're a beginner trying to get a feel for who's worth your resources or a seasoned player looking to optimize your lineup, this guide has got you covered. Now, I know what you're thinking. There are so many characters. How do I know who's actually good? Don't worry, we've done the testing, the grinding, and the research so you don't have to. We'll talk about which units can dominate, why they're a cut above the rest, and how you can use them to their full potential. So, grab a snack, sit back, and let's get into the definitive Anime Vanguards tier list. Ready? Let's dive in. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking units in Anime Vanguards. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of tier list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. First, let's start with the best sub-metrics.
A very small portion of the audience is subscribed to the channel. Please don't forget to subscribe if you like these types of videos. Thanks.
The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Ichigo, Joe, Jardita Seed, Tsado, John, Luffy, Vegeta, Naruto, Rukio, Roku, and Sanjo. Alright folks, let's dive deep into the underworld of D tier units in Anime Vanguards. Yeah, that's right, we're talking about the units you pick once, try for 5 minutes, and then quietly move on from. These are the underwhelming characters we really don't recommend if you're aiming for greatness, so buckle up because we're about to roast some rares. First up, let's talk about Ichigo. You'd think a 20% damage boost sounds exciting, right? Well, in practice, it's just not enough. Ichigo's attack itself is so lackluster that even with that passive, he barely makes a dent. Sure, you'll get a bit of extra damage, but trust me, it's like throwing a pebble at a tank. Cute, but totally ineffective. If you're picking Ichigo, you're setting yourself up for some serious disappointment. Now, Joe isn't the worst, but let's be real, he's nowhere near the best either. He actually has a pretty solid passive, which makes you think, hey, maybe this guy's got something special going on. But nope. As soon as you compare him to other rare units, you quickly see there are much stronger options out there. Joe's kinda like that dependable friend who's nice to have around, but when things get intense, you know he's not the one you'd rely on to carry the team. And then we have John, the unfortunate holder of the worst rare title. His passive should, in theory, make him better over time, but in reality, it just never comes together. You'll wait, and wait, and wait, and before you know it, the game's over, and John has accomplished absolutely nothing. It's painful. Honestly, John's the kind of character you keep around as a joke, or if you want to test how much you can handicap yourself. Then there's Luffy, who's kind of Ichigo's twin in disappointment. Instead of a damage boost, Luffy gets a bit of extra range with his passive. But honestly, that extra range doesn't help much when the attacks themselves are weak to begin with. It's like giving a slingshot a longer reach. It might hit, but it's still not doing any real damage. Luffy just can't keep up with the competition, plain and simple. Alright, let's have a chat about Vegeta. Vegeta is one of those characters who's just there. Not bad enough to make you laugh, but definitely not good enough to get excited about. In a world full of powerful rares, Vegeta just doesn't have any standout qualities, making him a forgettable choice. He's okay if you're out of other options, but honestly, you deserve better. And finally, we have Naruto. This one is almost tragic because Naruto's biggest strength is, well, his upgrades are cheap. Yep, that's about it. His passive is just bad, so you're basically left relying on his affordability. Not exactly what you're looking for when building a strong team, right? If you're pinching pennies, Naruto might make sense, but otherwise, he's just not gonna cut it. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Piccolo, Inosake, Shinji, Zenitsu, and Sasuke. Alright, buckle up folks, because we're about to dive into the C tier units of Anime Vanguards. This list has a bit of everything, some solid picks, some surprisingly decent rares, and, well, a few units you might want to reconsider bringing along. So, without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we've got Piccolo. Now, I know what you're thinking, C tier really, but hear me out. Piccolo's actually one of the best DPS options here. His range is wild, which makes him a solid choice for taking out those sneaky enemies that like to hang back. And let's talk about that multi-hit attack. If you're facing enemies with shields, Piccolo is your guy. He'll slice through those defenses like it's nobody's business. Now, if you're looking for a unit with some edge, Inosake might catch your eye. He's got this sweet bleed effect paired with a low SPA, meaning he can pump out a fair amount of damage. Now he's no Piccolo when it comes to pure firepower, but if your squad's short on shield breakers, Inasaki could be the answer. Plus, let's be honest, watching those bleed effects tick down is always satisfying, right? And then there's Shinzi. Okay, Shinzi is interesting. His DPS is pretty solid thanks to a handy passive skill, so if you need a decent hitter, he's got you covered. But here's the deal, that's kind of all he brings to the table. No fancy effects, no utility boosts, just straight DPS. Not bad, but if you're looking for versatility, you might find yourself wanting more from this one. Now, I hate to say it, but Zenitsu, he's a bit of a letdown. Like, if we're talking about raw DPS or special abilities, Zenitsu is just outclassed in every way. He doesn't pack enough power to stand toe-to-toe with the better C-tier units, and he lacks any unique utility that would make him a situational pick. If you've got other options, let's just say you're probably better off leaving Zenitsu on the bench. But wait, there's one rare that makes a surprising splash here. Sasuke. You might be shocked to see a rare in the mix, but Sasuke's burn effect is no joke. It's effective even before you start dumping upgrades into him, so he's a solid budget-friendly choice. If you're new to Anime Vanguards or just short on resources, Sasuke is honestly worth a spot in your lineup. So there you have it. These C-tier units may not be top-tier champions, but with the right strategies, they're far from useless. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Bean, Roku Dark, Goi, Hisidan, Chinese, Starlet, Goi, Grimwall, Butas, Nezuka, Genis, and Gari. Alright, let's dive into the B-tier legends of Anime Vanguards, where you'll find some real powerhouses just itching to prove they're more than mid-tier. They may not be the flashiest picks, but don't sleep on these units. They've got some tricks that can make a serious difference, especially if you know how to use them. First up, Bean. Don't be fooled by the name. This legendary unit is like a Swiss army knife. With a multi-hit attack and bleed effects, he's an absolute shield shredder, tearing through enemy defenses like it's nothing. His range is solid, and the DPS he cranks out, more than respectable. In tough battles, Bean really shines because he's not just about raw power, he's about precision. If shields are your biggest headache, Bean's your guy to make those barriers disappear. Then we've got Roku Dark, a name that sounds as edgy as his skill set. Roku Dark's passive lets him execute non-boss enemies, which is a game changer, especially on higher difficulties or when you're running low on upgrades. Just put him on the field and he'll start eliminating targets without a second thought. His DPS is no joke either, so if you're into clearing waves while keeping things efficient, Roku's the Dark 9-watt you want leading the charge. Now Goi might look like just another DPS focused unit, but trust me, he's got some unique flair. His damage scales up based on the number of enemies in his range, so if he's swarmed, he actually gets stronger. And to top it off, he has a knack for dodging attacks. So Goi isn't just good for crowd control, he's also incredibly useful for boss fights. If you play your cards right, Goi becomes a force of nature that's hard to take down. Moving on to a unit that's a bit more niche, we've got Grim Wow. Here's the thing about Grim. While he might not have the range or DPS to win any awards, his passive makes him fantastic for taking on bosses. When the game throws its heaviest hitters at you, Grim steps up with his reliable boss slaying capabilities. He's not the star in every situation, but if you're up against a tough boss, Grim Wow can bring that extra edge. Then there's Nezuka, who's like Genis 2.0. She packs more DPS and has a passive that ramps up her damage by a massive 75% against burning targets. You want things to heat up. Nezuka will melt through enemies before they even realize what hit them. She's the perfect counter if you're up against enemies that need to go down fast, with a solid mix of raw power and speed. Finally, Genis rounds out this tier with his signature burn damage. Genis may not have Nezuka's sheer firepower, but his passive lets him attack much faster, making him a perfect epic tier pick if you're focused on breaking shields. And while Gari has his moments, Genis' ability to add consistent burn damage gives him that little edge when shields and steady damage over time are your top priorities. So there you have it, these B tier picks are far from boring. Each one brings us something unique to the table, and in the right hands, they're just as powerful as some of those A and S tier units. Use them right and you'll see what I mean. And the units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Kinaru, Itochi, Kakashi, Kinua, and Blossom. Alright, let's dive into some of the A tier units in Anime Vanguards. Now, these aren't your absolute top picks, but trust me, they bring some serious utility to the table. You might find yourself surprised at just how handy they can be in the right situations. Let's break down why these characters are worth keeping around, starting with Kinaru. Now, I know his passive looks questionable at first glance, almost like it's working against you rather than for you, but don't let that fool you. The real magic here is his stun immunity. Some of those story bosses will throw everything at you, including brutal stuns, and this little perk will make Kinaru a lifesaver. Plus, when he's dropped in, he's got a multi-hit attack that dishes out decent damage. Overall, Kinaru's DPS won't break records, but he's rock solid, and that stun immunity, total game changer. Then we've got Itochi. Now, if you're facing enemies with pesky shields, Itochi's the answer. He's got the best burn out of all the sub-mythics, and his DPS? Let's just say it holds up. You don't often see burn effects that can actually get through those defenses, but Itochi's burn is next level. Whether you're stuck in a raid or dealing with shielded mobs, Itochi is your reliable DPS and debuffer rolled into one. Moving on to Kakashi, a unit with some nice crowd control potential. His main attack deals solid damage and comes with a stun effect, though it's admittedly short. While you won't see enemies locked down for long, that quick stun can still be incredibly useful. Think of it as a fast, disruptive tool rather than full control. And hey, sometimes that's all you need to tip the fight in your favor. Next up is Kinua, who might look a little like Kakashi's twin, but trust me, he's got his own spin. Kinua's attacks are all about knockback and stuns, giving him just a slight edge in keeping enemies at bay. He might not pack the same punch as Alligator, but he's definitely a step up from Kakashi in terms of control. If you're building a strategy that needs frequent disruptions, Kinua's a solid pick to keep foes on their toes. And finally, we've got Blossom, your go-to for getting rid of debuffs. Blossom has an impressive cleanse ability within her range, with a 100-second cooldown. Now that might seem like a long wait, but when you're knee-deep in something like the DD Legend stages or the infamous Rengoku raid, that cooldown feels way more forgiving. She's the ultimate support pick if your team needs a breather from relentless stuns or other nasty debuffs. Each of these units has their own special something that really stands out. And while they might not hit S tier, they're a clutch when you need them most. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Takaroda, Sprint Wagon, Alligator, Agony, Inamuki, and Nobaba. Oh, if you're looking to power up your team in Anime Vanguards, then sit tight, because we're about to dive into some absolute legends. These S tier units aren't just solid, they're game changers. Let's break down the ultimate lineup, starting with some of the most versatile farm and support units that you should have your eye on. First up, Takaroda. Now, this guy is the meta king when it comes to farm units. Think of him as your powerhouse for longer game modes. He's a significant upgrade over Sprint Wagon, our next unit, though Sprint Wagon holds his ground like a pro in shorter modes. Takaroda is built to sustain your resources in those drawn-out battles, giving you an advantage that's almost unfair. But hey, we're here to win, right? Sprint Wagon, on the other hand, is a sprinter, quite literally. He's the absolute best farm unit for short modes, and honestly, he's indispensable for any squad that's trying to speedrun through waves. If you're focusing on efficiency and quick clears, Sprint Wagon is your best friend. You'll want him on your team when the action heats up and you need that quick cash flow. Now let's talk about Alligator, the support unit that's practically a must-have. He's got this incredible 50% slow debuff that, once applied, is almost permanent. Imagine the advantage you get in boss battles where every second counts. And here's the best part, he doesn't even need as much investment to get going compared to Agony, so he's an epic level unit that doesn't break the bank. Speaking of Agony, here's a support unit that's well worth the grind if you're willing to put in the effort. His full AoE on placement and knockback abilities make him a fantastic choice, especially in situations where you need a little crowd control. But be ready to invest in him to lower that S-bar, as he needs a bit of polish before he can truly shine. Inamuki, now there's a unit who knows how to draw attention. Literally. Like Agony, he's solid for support, but instead of pushing enemies away, he pulls them toward him. Early on, he's a total asset for crowd control, keeping your enemies close and your front lines protected. Not bad, right? Finally, we've got Nobaba. She's a bleed unit with a respectable DPS and range, plus a pretty sweet cone AoE attack. Her bleed effect can be super useful in the right situations, but let's be real, you'll likely replace her with better units as you progress. Still, she holds her own in the mid-game, and for that, she earns her place here. So there you have it, our S-tier lineup in Anime Vanguards. These units offer a little bit of everything: powerful farming, crowd control, and unique support abilities. Make sure to keep an eye out for these legends to take your game to the next level. Now let's talk about the best units for story, paragon, challenges, and raids modes. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Blossom, Todo Unleashed, Todo, Sosuke Storm, Kakashi, Kinua, and Haruka Rin. Alright, let's dive right into some hidden gems in the good tier for support units in Anime Vanguards. Now these aren't the god tier legends you might see dominating everywhere, but trust me, if you play them right, these units can be total game changers. From strategic buffs to super useful stuns, they've got tricks up their sleeves that will have your opponents guessing. Let's go through some of these underdog units that could just turn the tide in those tough battles. First up is Blossom. Think of her as the ultimate problem solver against debuffs. Her ability to cleanse debuffs in her range is perfect when you're dealing with those brutal stuns, especially in DD Legend stages or Rengoku raids. The only drawback? That 100-second cooldown. But if you're timing her right, Blossom can be the difference between your team going down and hanging in there. She's not a consistent support like others, but when you need her, she's clutch. Then we've got Todo Unleashed, the evolved form of Todo with a little extra kick. If you're looking at stats, they're a little better, but what's really cool is his additional attack. That said, his passive isn't anything mind-blowing, so you won't be picking him purely for stats, but his active ability? Now that's something you'll want on your side. When maxed out, he can pack a punch, and hey, sometimes just that extra attack can be what you need to break through. Now the regular Todo, not Unleashed, is still worth a look. His stats are nothing to write home about, but his active ability to swap places with another unit can be a huge tactical play. Think tournaments, think Shibuya Infinite. These are situations where placement is key, and Todo's ability lets you outmaneuver the enemy. Sure, he won't be dishing out heavy damage, but with the right strategy, Todo's mobility is gold. Sosuke Storm comes in strong with his crowd control and is honestly a super handy support mythic. His stun is fantastic, and if you've kept up with the buffs, you know it's only gotten better recently. The guy can hold enemies in place and increase the damage they take, which is a sweet setup for your attackers to go to town. Sasuke isn't just good support, he's an enabler. With him, you're giving your other units a prime opportunity to clean house. Kakashi is next up, and he's all about those quick stuns. He's not the most powerful in terms of dealing damage, but Kakashi's stun makes him a reliable choice when you need that quick interrupt. Just be aware, the stun is pretty short, so he's not going to be holding enemies in place for long, but if you need that split-second advantage, Kakashi's your guy. Lastly, we've got Kinua and Haruka Rin. Kinua's a bit of an all-rounder in this tier. He's got knockbacks, stuns, and just a bit more versatility than Kakashi. However, he still falls short of alligator level. And then there's Haruka Rin. She's honestly pretty basic in her non-evil form and might not stand out much, but don't sleep on her. Her evolution makes her way more effective, so if you're planning to invest long-term, she's worth keeping on your radar. These units are the unsung heroes of the good tier. They might not be flashy, but if you're smart with them, they'll pay off in spades. Let me know which ones are your favorites, or if you found other hidden gems in Anime Vanguards. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Sprint Wagon, Takaroda, Haruka, Rin Dancer, Alligator, Julius, Inamuki, and Agony. Alright, hold on tight because we're about to dive into the most meta, must-have support units in Anime Vanguards. These picks are the absolute backbone of any solid squad, and trust me, they bring the heat. First up is Sprint Wagon, the ultimate farm unit for short game modes. Picture this, you're racing against the clock and Sprint Wagon's pumping out resources faster than you can say game over. If you need a farm boost and you need it now, Sprint Wagon is that guy. But for those longer matches, Takaroda is where the magic happens. Takaroda's a legendary upgrade over Sprint Wagon. He's got that late game stamina Sprint Wagon just can't match. So, while Sprint Wagon shines in the short term, Takaroda is the king of drawn out battles where you need a steady flow of resources. Whether you're in a rush or pacing yourself, these two together are like the dynamic farming duo you didn't know you needed. Moving on to buffs, we've got Haruka Rin Dancer in her Evo form, and she's all about spreading the love across your squad. Her range extending passive might seem subtle, but don't be fooled, it's incredibly powerful when applied to multiple units at once. Haruka makes everyone around her that much better, so if you're looking to make the most of your squad's DPS and coverage, she's your go-to. And then there's Alligator, our epic support superstar. Alligator doesn't mess around. He slaps a near constant 50% slow debuff on enemies, which can be a game changer in boss battles. Imagine watching a boss trying to crawl its way across the field, only to get tripped up by Alligator's endless slow. Plus, he's got a low entry cost, so you're getting that sweet debuff without breaking the bank. Major value. Julius in his unevolved form might not have the raw DPS of his evolved version, but don't sleep on his freeze ability. get his SPA low enough, and with 3 maxed placements, Julius becomes this freezing machine, locking enemies in place at just the right moment. For crowd control, Julius is a clutch pick. You can just feel the tension every time he freezes a target. Last but not least, we've got Inamuki and Agony, 2 different flavors of support with some fun tricks up their sleeves. Inamuki pulls enemies toward him, which is ideal for controlling the field early on, while Agony brings that full AoE knockback to the table. Agony's a bit of a diva when it comes to investment, but once you get that SBA down, he's worth every bit. So, there you have it. Each of these units is special in its own right, but together, they're unstoppable. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Naruto Six Tails, Igros, Gujo, Tengon, Sosuke Hebi, Obita, Naruto Seiga, and Itadori. Alright, buckle up because we're about to dive into the not so hot lineup of Anime Vanguards Mythics. Now don't get me wrong, Mythic units are usually fantastic, but not every Mythic in this game gets that VIP treatment. Some of these are, let's say, questionable. So let's see which ones are slipping into the bad tier and why. Starting off with Naruto Six Tails. Now this guy should have been a beast, right? But no, Evo Naruto just doesn't deliver like you'd expect. Those passives? Yikes. They're basically trash, but if you're all about raw stats, then sure, Naruto can be a decent choice. He recently got a buff, so he's not completely hopeless, but let's just say there are better options out there. Next up, Igros. Here's the thing, non-Evo Igros, he's not terrible. In fact, he's got some respectable stats for what he is, but you'll need to evolve him if you want him to hit that next level. Right now, he's more like a stat stick. Good numbers, but nothing exciting going on. Unless you're willing to grind out that evolution, Igros might be more trouble than he's worth. Then we have Gujo, and oof, this mythic really struggles to keep up. If you've used the Gujo, you've probably noticed his attacks don't have multi-hit, and his range, mediocre at best. Now, the only thing saving Gujo from complete disaster is his decent DPS, but honestly, for a mythic unit, he just feels underwhelming. Evolutions help, but even then, he's hardly top tier. Let's talk about Tengon. He's got a bit more going for him with a cone AoE multi-hit attack and some okay DPS. And get this, he comes with a dodge passive, which is actually pretty handy for bosses that try to throw stuns your way. He's still not amazing, but if you're in a tight spot, Tengon can hold his own, at least for a bit. Now, Sosuke Hebi, bless his heart, is just not pulling his weight. His SPA, DMG, and range. Meh across the board. If you're hoping for a sleeper unit that can somehow carry you through, well, this isn't it. Sosuke has all the stats of a mythic, but none of the wow factor. So unless you're a diehard fan, this one might just stay in the collection. Moving along to Obita. Here's a guy with a passive that just doesn't do him any favors. His placement and upgrade costs are so high that he's already a rough pick, but then you compare him to other non-Evo mythics and he just doesn't stack up. That price tag is hard to swallow for what you're getting, and there are just better mythics out there. And then there's Naruto Sage. Let's call him a situational mythic. His passive can actually be decent if you manage to place him exactly right, but that's the thing, he needs very specific placement to shine. Even then, Naruto Sage is just kinda okay. Sure, he can hold his own, but compared to the top mythics, he's just not in the same league. Finally, we have Itadori, and wow, Itadori is straight up garbage for most situations. The one exception, the Sukuna boss rush event. For that, he's a superstar. His evolution is OP, and if you get the Monarch trait on him, he suddenly feels like he's meant to rule. Outside of those very specific uses though, Itadori is painfully average. There you have it. These mythics may have that legendary label, but let's be real, they're here in the bad tier for a reason. Still, if you're willing to work with what you've got, even these guys can have a place in your lineup. But hey, when you're aiming for the best, you'll probably want to look somewhere else. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Mohato, Alucard, Tutiditaz, Alucard, Tuji, Rengoku, Obita Awakened, Chaso, Songjinwo, Akazo, and Jago. Alright, here's the deal. These units may not be top of the meta, but they bring plenty of power to the table, and with the right strategy, they can get you some serious results. Let's kick things off with Mohato. Now I know, he's not exactly melting faces with the current DPS setup, but he's got enough punch to hold his own. Mohato's main issue? That line AoE attack. Yeah, it's just not hitting right. And his passives? Well, let's just say they're a little on the disappointing side. But if you like a challenge and want to show off some skill, Mohato can still shine in the right setup. Now, let's talk about Alucard because, wow, this guy is doing some impressive work even without evolution. Alucard brings the bleed effect, full AoE, and solid range, basically a triple threat. If you're going for infinite mode, this guy is practically the MVP of non-evolved units. Sure, he's not at Evo level power, but don't sleep on his versatility and spread damage potential. He's the kind of unit that makes you think, do I even need the evolution right now? And then we've got 2G, another non-Evo hero who's honestly way better than people realize. At maxed out level, he's got full AoE and nice DPS, plus that sweet multi-hit that comes in clutch. But here's the real kicker, his passive boosts his damage by 50% when he's not getting any buffs. Yep, that's right, no need for extra support, he's a solo powerhouse. It's like 2G came with the I don't need any help attitude built in, which let's be real is kind of awesome. Rengoku is up next, and this guy brings the heat, literally. With burn on placement, Rengoku can tear through shields with ease. Upgrade him to level 2, and you get a cone AoE attack that gives him a little extra firepower as well. Rengoku's definitely more of an early game MVP, especially when you're up against those annoying shields. So, if you need a solid starter or a shield buster, Rengoku's a fantastic choice. He's like that reliable friend who's always got your back when things get tough. Onto Obita Awakened. Evo Obita packs a solid DPS punch and a burn effect, which sounds great, right? And it is. But compared to units like SCW and Chiayin, he just doesn't have that extra flair. However, if you're looking for straightforward DPS and a bit of shield breaking power, Obita's there to deliver. He's more of a dependable, no fuss kind of unit, which, hey, we need those in our lineup sometimes. Then there's Chaso, another non-Evo unit who gets the job done when it comes to applying bleed effects. He's a solid choice if you're going up against shielded enemies, but if you're just looking for raw DPS or don't need the bleed, there are probably better options out there. Chaso is one of those units who's fantastic when the situation calls for him, but not the best fit for every scenario. He's like a specialist, great when you need his particular set of skills. Song Jinwo might not look like much at first glance, he's pretty basic on stats to be honest. But this guy has a multi-hit right from placement and a strong passive that makes him worth keeping around. Here's the best part. His evolution is meta, meaning once you level him up, he's a serious powerhouse. So think of Song Jinwo as an investment. He may start off a little underwhelming, but the payoff is absolutely worth it in the long run. And finally, we have Jago. Univo Jago is kind of like a watered down version of Rengoku. His burn effect is useful for breaking through shields, but his upgrades are a bit pricey, which can make him hard to justify outside of infinite mode. Still, if you're looking for a shield buster in infinite and don't mind the cost, he's worth a look. Jago's a bit niche, but in the right situation, he's far from useless. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Zion Berdelion, Jago Volcanic, Rengoku An Chuchandai, Rengoku Purgatory, Julius Iceplosion, Igros Elite Knight, Song Jinwoo Monarch, Akazo Destructive, Vegeta Super, and Cha-In. Alright, let's dive into the world of Anime Vanguards and talk about some of the solid units that are making waves in the meta right now. These units are all about burning through the competition, literally and figuratively, so let's break down some of the best picks you can add to your roster. First up, we've got Zion Berdelion, an absolute beast when it comes to the meta burn mythics, especially in infinite mode. This guy isn't just about damage, he's got 4 placements, a fantastic range, and a passive that gets stronger the more burning enemies he's up against. The more they burn, the harder he hits. It's like he feeds off the flames. Seriously, if you've got him, you're definitely in for a fun ride. Next, let's talk about Jago Volcanic. If you thought his regular form was solid, wait until you get your hands on the Evo version. Not only does he pack a punch with much better stats, but his active is a game changer, boosting his power and turning him into full AoE, area of effect, for a full 15 seconds. This is one of those units that can really take over a match, especially in tougher stages. For infinite mode? Oh yeah, he's solid. Then we've got Rengoku Purgatory, arguably one of the weaker exclusive units right now. Don't get me wrong, he's got some perks. His passive boosts his damage against enemies he repeatedly attacks, and he also deals extra burn damage to already burning targets. But here's the kicker, he's not full AoE. In a game where AoE matters a lot, that limitation can really hurt his overall effectiveness. Still, if you need a single target powerhouse, Rengoku's your guy. Moving on, let's talk Julius Iceplosion, the go-to support in Anime Vanguards right now. This unit is a beast when it comes to crowd control. His attacks hit multiple times and freeze enemies in a large AoE. Not to mention his stats are pretty solid, making him one of the most reliable support units in the game. If you need something to help lock down the battlefield while your damage dealers go to work, Julius is the one to have. And here comes Igros Elite Knight. This guy, when paired with Evo SJW, becomes an absolute powerhouse. The synergy between these two is insane. Igros is full AoE, immune to stun, multi-hits like crazy, and his stats? Top tier. Combine that with the buffs he gets from Evo SJW and the Jan Nan Sis Ice AW, and you've got a unit that's nearly unstoppable. He's a top tier pick for anyone who loves having an edge in battles. Now, let's not forget Song Jinwoo Monarch. Evo SJW might be the star, but Song Jinwoo brings in some insane DPS and summoning abilities. Not only does he dish out the damage, but he can summon units to the battlefield, which adds a whole new layer of strategy. With his synergy with Igris, you're looking at one of the best mythic combinations in the game. If you want to maximize your potential, this guy's your ally. Akaza Destructive is another mythic worth considering. His active skill grants him stun immunity and boosts his stats, which can really come in handy during some of the more intense stages. He's got a decent range line attack, though his DPS isn't the best out there. Still, in certain situations, he shines. His ability to stay safe from stuns while dealing damage can turn the tide in your favor. And lastly, we've got Vogeta Super. He might not be the flashiest unit, but he's got a very solid passive that lowers his attack speed if only Vogeta units are in range, which can be super helpful for getting the most out of his attacks. He's a great starting unit, especially in challenges, and his ability to break shields is a big plus. Sometimes you don't need the most complex units, Vogeta gets the job done. So, whether you're looking for massive AoE damage, reliable support, or some sneaky utility, Anime Vanguards has got a wide variety of units to play around with. Each of these units has their own strengths, so depending on your playstyle and strategy, you'll want to mix and match to create the perfect team for whatever challenge comes your way. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Sukuna, Gujo Infinity, Vogeta Super Awakened, 2G Sorcerer Killer, Chazo Blood Curse, Alucard Vampire King, Chayan Blade Dancer, Tengon Flashiness, Mechamar, and Legendary Super Brolzy. Alright, let's talk about the absolute powerhouse units in Anime Vanguards, the ones that are just too good to ignore. These units are taking over the game, and if you're not running them, you're probably missing out on a lot of potential. So, let's dive into the meta tier and see what makes these units the top of the food chain. First up, we have Sukuna. Now, this guy is a beast. His cone AoE attack, when fully upgraded, is insane, and that full AoE active ability, it's a game changer. Plus, with only one max placement, he gets even more deadly when paired with Monarch, making him an absolute threat. If you're looking for reliable DPS, this is your guy. Next, let's talk about Gujo Infinity. You've probably heard of him by now. This guy is the definition of meta. His DPS, off the charts, his full AoE when maxed out, a no-brainer. But what really sets him apart is his OP ability with a short cooldown. He can wipe and stun everything on the map, except bosses, of course. If you want to clear mobs fast, Gujo Infinity is the unit you want. Then there's Vogeta Super Awakened. He's been buffed recently, and let me tell you, he's not playing around anymore. He's cheap to place and upgrade, which is already a huge win, but his multi-hit ability is perfect for dealing with shields. And don't get me started on his passive, it makes him ridiculously effective against bosses. Vogeta's definitely one to keep on your team. Now, Evo Toji, or 2G Sorcerer Killer, is a whole vibe on his own. This guy's passive ability lets him take down shields with ease and boost his damage after that. He's got solid stats across the board, and the best part? You get to switch between two abilities depending on what you're facing, bosses or mobs. He's versatile and deadly, which is exactly what you want in a meta unit. Chazo Blood Curse is another one that will have you saying, this unit is too good. His full AoE attack is a start, but what really makes him stand out is his passive. It boosts his damage whenever he attacks bleeding enemies, which is a pretty solid combo, and with 4 max placements, he's an essential pick for infinite runs. More placements mean more chances to deal damage, and that's just what you need for those longer rounds. Alucard Vampire King is basically a legend in the making. Full AoE, bleed, massive range, low SBA, and crazy base damage. What's not to love? Plus he can summon units that are way better than SJWs, which just adds another layer of strategy. Alucard brings everything to the table, making him one of the top picks in Anime Vanguards. Cheat-in Blade Dancer, folks. This one is a straight-up game changer. She's got dodging and countering down to an art, and with her increased crit chance, her DPS is just off the charts. Not to mention, her range is insane. She outperforms some of the other top mythics like Evo Igros and Evo Alucard, especially in those short modes. She's a force to be reckoned with. Now, let's talk about Tengon Flashiness. This guy has one of the best passives in the game, boosting his damage while lowering his Esper. He's got full AoE, multi-hit, and an insane DPS to top it all off. If you want a mythic that can clear mobs and deal with bosses with ease, Tengon Flashiness is where it's at. He's got everything you need for those high level stages. And last, but certainly not least, we have Mechama. This guy might start off looking like your average unit, but once you upgrade him to level 8, his bonus damage kicks in and he becomes an absolute powerhouse. For that, he's solid as a DPS, but when it's time to take down a boss, you'll see his true power. Mechama's the type of unit you'll want to have in your back pocket for those intense late game runs, and there you have it. The meta units of Anime Vanguards. Whether you're looking for raw DPS, strategic flexibility, or sheer power, these units deliver every time. If you're not running at least a few of these, it might be time to rethink your strategy. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.